From inside the Banner offices along the Inner Harbor, it is the Banner Baseball Show. Paul Mancano and Jon Meoli. John, it's been a while.
It's been a while. The baseball show is back.
It's back. The BBS is B. We are back here. I'm sure some people thought it may never return. We thought we may never return, but we are back here in December. Took a couple months off to gather our thoughts, to assess where the Orioles are as they head into the offseason. And we've got some thoughts for you now.
I have a few thoughts, and the offseason is like a strange time when you expect things to happen and it doesn't happen. And that's always been the case with the Orioles more so than other teams. But now you kind of do think like, okay, like if they're doing something, like something's going to happen soon. And that's not something we felt about this team in a long time.
No, the winter meetings are around the corner. This team has made a couple of the necessary moves, like either picking up or declining player options, club options. We're going to talk about that in just a bit. They also made another change to their left field wall, which we'll discuss. They made some coaching staff changes, but the bulk of the offseason has yet to commence. And I think a lot of teams are sitting here waiting for the Juan Soto saga to play out. And we're hearing through national reports that he could decide even before the winter meetings start. That should hopefully kickstart things in the offseason, and hopefully we get some resolution, because we really just don't know what kind of team Mike Elias is going to build here, because this is the first offseason under new management, under new ownership.
Yeah, and you know, my operating theory is like they do the things they want to do really well. They have for a long time, whether it's drafting, player development, you know, creating opportunities for young guys when the time comes. We haven't really seen what an offseason of like, we aren't constrained financially. We have a couple of things that we actually need to target, and like it's not a wait and see. Like it's easy when you just need a 1-year closer to sign the best 1-year closer you think is available at that time.
Yep.
It's easy when you just need 180 like average innings to pick the guy that's available for that as it comes. Like there's going to be competition for what they want, and that's something that I'm fascinated to see how they respond to. Like when it starts heating up, when they have to make a decision, are they able to pull the trigger on that?
I'm interested to see if they're going to sign anybody to multi-year deals, because that's when you really start playing the big boy free agency pool. Because right now, you know, this team has been going year to year with 1-year contracts, like the Craig Kimbrell one with an option for the next year. And right now they need some guys not only for 2025, but potentially beyond that, given the fact that the farm system's no longer number one in baseball. They don't have number one prospects at every position ready to come up to the big leagues. There are some guys still waiting, like Samuel Basayo and Kobe Mayo, who could be ready in 2025. But there are other spots, maybe the outfield, where you say you could use somebody for 2026 and beyond. So once you start handing out those multi-year contracts, that's really when you become an actual player in free agency, and not just the Tampa Bay Rays or the Milwaukee Brewers, where you're just going year to year pretty much.
Yeah. And you mentioned, you know, what kind of team they're going to put together. I think that just because we know what the needs are, you know, if the Orioles have a 2022 Orioles offseason and do like not a ton, or 2023 where they kind of like are still in that tape, like they still have the pretty good team that it was, but it will be disappointing relative to what I think are now actual real expectations.
Yeah. All right. Let's talk about what they've done so far. Let's talk about the coaching staff, because we've seen a lot of changes there. I'm going to try to remember them all here. I wrote them down. Matt Borg-Schulte and Ryan Fuller, their two hitting coaches, have moved on. Borg-Schulte went back to Minnesota. Ryan Fuller went to the Chicago White Sox. Chris Holt, their director of pitching, went to Boston. Freddie Gonzalez, Jose Hernandez, both those guys, big league coaches in the past several years. Those guys are both out. Cody Asche gets a promotion. He's promoted to hitting coach. Robin Cincherinos, our old friend, is added as a bench coach, and Buck Britton is added as a big league coach. What to you stood out most of all of these changes, John?
I think that the kind of evolution, if you can call it that, on the hitting side was fascinating to see actually play out. You know, we've talked about a lot, and you talked about with anyone who sat in this chair about how the team was hitting in the last couple months of the season and what was behind that. That was a subject of a lot of discourse, to say the least. My thought was that they were not going to make any kind of like wholesale changes. And with Cody Asche taking the lead hitting coach role, and Tommy Joseph and Sherman Johnson also on the hitting staff, it seems like they didn't make any massive changes, because I don't think they did. I think Cody Asche, I think what you have there now, and not to say that it was something that was lacking. We have 3 guys with big league experience who have sat in the chairs that the people they're talking to are sitting in, and felt bad after a bad game and felt good after a good game, and done that for a long time at the professional and the highest level you can. I think that's going to be the major change, and I think that there's going to be a bounce offensively anyways, just because, as Michael I said, and is true, hitting with runners in scoring position is pretty volatile from year to year. You can't really predict it. But so just having like what happened last year happen means you're probably going to get a regression in a good way this year. And it's kind of a signal to me that the Orioles still believe in what they're doing. They're not just blindly saying this is what we think is right, so we're going to keep doing it. I think they were pretty intentional in trying to ensure that what they do and what they believe is right. And the staff they kind of demonstrated they're still pretty confident in this.
Yeah, I mean, was still a good offense last year. Finished 4th in OPS, 2nd in home runs. And I know the biggest criticism from fans was they were too reliant on the home run, which is understandable. But that is also a team that is hitting that many home runs is also scoring a lot of runs. It's the easiest way to score runs.
Yeah.
So this team is making a change, but they're not drastically, as you've written about on the BaltimoreBanner.com, where people can subscribe $1 for 6 months. This team is not drastically altering the way that they think about and the way that they teach hitting. Cody, it's not like they went outside the organization to bring in this hitting guru, somebody who is a very old school approach who says hit the ball hard on the ground. They are still of the belief that the easiest way to score runs is to hit the home run. But perhaps they're slightly tinkering their approach, and perhaps they're going to go after some guys in free agency or in trades that can draw more walks, can get on base more, so that it's not all hitting the home run and relying on that.
Yeah, and home runs, this is something that whether you're an old baseball head or a guy who's worked in a facility is going to say that home runs are like a symptom of hard contact. Like if you're trying to hit the ball hard in the air at good angles, you're going to hit home runs. But if you're trying to hit home runs, you're not necessarily always going to hit home runs. So It's just an iteration of that. And I think that the processes that are in place in the organization are the kind that try to get that good hard contact. I'm interested to see if the team does anything like different, like situationally. You're not going to see guys changing their swings necessarily. Maybe they're going to be a little more liberal in their the pitches they want to put in play in those like runners in scoring position situations. But again, like when we talk about this offense falling off in the second half, there aren't, truthfully, a ton of individuals that could fall on. Like Gunnar Henderson wasn't the Gunnar Henderson of the first half, but he still had like an almost 900 OPS, I think, in the second half. Like Colton Cowser wasn't what he was in April, but he was pretty good in the second half. Jordan Westberg was hurt. Ryan Mountcastle was hurt. You're really just talking about, Adley Rutschman. So, and like everything just comes back to Adley Rutschman. I'm going to keep doing this until they play again. But like, that's what we're talking about is like, and Adley came up in a lot of those big spots, and I tried to quantify it. I still have all the spreadsheets I tried to make saved on my computer. They're never going to see the light of day, nor will the story, because I didn't really find any, like, I don't know what I was finding, but it felt like he was up in a ton of those spots. And like, if he just did what he normally does, we're probably not having this conversation.
Yeah. One thing on the coaching staff mentioned Buck Britton being promoted to the big league staff after being the AAA Norfolk manager for several years. A guy that we've talked to a lot over the years, a guy that got a spot on the national stage when he was throwing in the home run derby to Gunnar Henderson. This feels like a nice, I wouldn't say gesture, because it obviously goes beyond gesture. The Orioles clearly value the advice that he gives to players, the way he interacts with players. But also, this is kind of a nice reward for Buck Britton, because he has been in the minor leagues and doing great stuff for several years. And you very rarely nowadays see somebody just go from AAA manager to big league manager. You usually have to have some kind of experience, either as a big league player, which he never was, or on a big league staff. So this feels like maybe a first step to an eventual managerial gig somewhere in baseball.
Yeah, and he's in the mix now. He's going to be there, in the meeting, seeing how things are going, and that's like the logical next step. Talking to people as I was in the last couple of months for the Baseball America prospect list. It came up a couple times, like the job that he did. He was a hitter. He helps the hitters a lot, but just like overall being a manager of of a AAA team. And that was like a true AAA team this year. It wasn't like a prospect fest like
Right.
it has been in years past. I mean, they were ridiculous at the beginning of the year in terms of the talent and the offensive output they were putting on. But as the season went on, you have guys who want to be in the big leagues who aren't. You have like a lot of like 4A, like fringy depth guys that are signed just to fill needs. And like, that's not usually the happiest cohort in the world. And he, his job was to manage all that. He's the manager, but his job was to keep those players focused and to keep, that train on the tracks. And it was a lot harder of a job, I feel like, this year than in years past. But, we talk about Ryan Fuller, who's now no longer with the organization. Chris Holt came up from the minors.
Yep.
You have Mitch Plasmeyer on the pitching side, Sherman Johnson on the hitting side now, Cody Ashley. Like, this is just another iteration of like, there are opportunities here for guys if you want to, if you're a coach and you want to progress your career. And I think that's something that, especially with somebody who's as well respected and well liked as Buck Britton, you kind of have to make that. You have to make that move at some point.
Yeah, so long as he's not throwing BP in a home run derby again, because that was not the best showing.
Yeah, it just seemed like it was. It seemed like it was.
The moment got too big for him, maybe.
I don't know if it was him or them, but even when they were warming up, there was one time they were warming up on the field at Camden Yards, and they were trying to figure out like how the timing was going to work and this and that, and it just felt like they're never really locked in. But also Orioles coaches like spend a lot of time in their batting practice now, like trying to get guys out. And like,
yeah,
I talked to Buck Britton when I was doing a story about that, like challenging BP, that like how nervous he felt wanting to just like throw like heaters down the middle to like the big boys in big league spring training when you have thrown to a group like Chris Davis and Mark Trumbo, and like all you want to hear is loud sounds.
Yeah.
And it's been a long time since that's how that BP went.
Yeah. And also, I mean, I remember visiting, I think it was 2 years ago, visiting Delmarva when Cody Ashley was down there visiting, and he was throwing BP to a group, and they were kind of with Dylan Beavers and a group of recently drafted guys, and they were kind of messing around, and he kind of put them in their place. It was kind of a moment of, hey guys, we're here to do a job.
Yeah.
Like don't mess around. And I think that's the kind of thing that Orioles fans would like to see. You obviously don't get to see too much of that behind the scenes, but you can tell Cody Ashley takes his job very seriously, and that he is going to bring, a very business-like approach to this Orioles clubhouse as well.
Yeah, and I mean, I wrote it when he was hired. It sticks out to me that if you didn't know, if you were like a parachuting in reporter when the Orioles lost in that playoff game, in game 2, and kind of like everyone was kind of processing it, like he was like sitting on the floor in between like players' lockers, like with them. Like he's still close enough to that where he understands what that feels like. Like it feels different when you're a coach and a player. You don't really have any control over it, but like he was right there, like
living and dying with
it.
Yeah,
he was literally like breaking it down and like with the players as if he was one of them. It's not to say that he's going to be like a peer, but like he understands what they were going through in probably a pretty intimate way.
Yeah. All right. Before we even get to the more player personnel moves, we should talk about the wall, because John, the wall is moving again for the second time in 3 years after the Orioles moved it back by 26 plus feet several years ago. They acknowledge it was an overcorrection. Mike Elias said that they're bringing it back in. It's going back to its original spot in more of the left center area, and it's coming in by 13 feet, 9 inches when you get closer to the left field line. I will say it's not often that teams' front offices acknowledge mistakes. So I appreciate that the Orioles acknowledged that they overcorrected, that they went too far. I don't know what they're going to put in the weird now space between. It's just going to be a massive Mr. Splash pool. I don't know what it's going to be between the new wall and the old wall.
Yeah, let's do some I assume there's going to be like a branded beer cooler in there and the ability to go buy beer in there at some point. That feels reasonable, but there's not a lot of, as you mentioned, opportunities to change something that you need to be changed. Like how long would this have gone on if they didn't just like sit down in a room and be like, what are we doing? Here? Is it going to be like 10 years from now and like there's no right-handed hitters and like teams can come in here with a group of like touch and feel lefties and carve up the Orioles because it's just a lineup of lefties because no right-handed hitter can succeed here. Like whatever was happening wasn't going well. So like it's going to make a difference.
Yeah, it definitely is. And it's the first step in an offseason where the Orioles need to improve their hitting. They need to bring in a right-handed bat. I mean, that's clearly priority number 1. And so Mike Elias acknowledged when he was talking to the media that the wall is something that has come up in conversations. And when they moved the wall back, Mike Elias never said explicitly the reason we're doing it is to attract starting pitchers so that they can come to Baltimore and see their ERAs drop. But that was definitely one of the reasons that they made the move. They never did that. The only starting pitcher that they signed with that wall being moved back was Kyle Gibson. Yeah. So they really didn't experience the benefits of that either. And so they figure, well, if we're not even getting the benefits of being able to pitch to pitchers that your ERA will go down, hopefully we can get some of the hitters back that we lost, because they don't want to come to Baltimore and say, well, I'm going to lose 20 home runs next year like Ryan Mountcastle did because the wall is so ridiculously far back.
Yeah. And I mean, it's absolutely true that pitchers would just like straight up not talk to the Orioles when they didn't have the wall. Yeah. They were just like, sorry, like we're not even going to think about this. But I think that if we're talking about in the context of the right-handed hitters who would come here, that kind of makes me think they're looking on like a shorter term deal, because if you're signing like a 4-5 year deal as like somebody who reached free agency, which means you're going to spend most of your time in your 30s and that, like, yeah, you are getting paid already. Right. You don't need to like worry about what your next contract is going to be. So like if you are going to suffer and have good expected stats and have fewer home runs than you should, but you are locked in for 4 years at like $20-some million, like there's an element of professional pride, but also like you probably take that deal if it's the best deal, regardless of where the wall is. Yeah. So it makes me kind of think that if that was part of the consideration, that it would be like shorter term outfield options. But I'm really fascinated to see, when we talk about the natural improvements that are just going to happen from year to year, like it's more than Ryan Mountcastle and Jordan Westburg and some of those right-handed hitters. Gunnar Henderson hits a lot of like long opposite field fly balls. Like, yeah, Gunnar Henderson hitting a handful more home runs every year would be cool. That would be good for the Orioles. Adley Rutschman. Everyone can benefit from this, and I think it's going to make an offense that is looking for ways to improve without an overhaul better, and that's not easy to accomplish. And they're doing it, just by putting up some new walls.
Yeah, and I think of the wild card series where Ramon Urias, Jordan Westburg hit 2 long fly balls to left field. I don't know if both would have gone out with the old wall, but they probably could have hit off the wall. They probably could have dropped in there. Potentially, Orioles don't muster really any offense in that series and they lose.
Yeah.
So Orioles definitely saw the downside of having that wall move back. All right, let's talk about the options and the Orioles' decisions on club options, because there were some interesting ones. They pick up Ryan O'Hearn's $8 million option. They pick up Sir Anthony Dominguez's $8 million option. They pick up CNL Perez's $2.2 million option. I think all of those make sense. They declined Eloy Jimenez's $16.5 million option. That is a shocker.
They did.
Wow. I mean, what are they going to do? And the biggest move and perhaps the most surprising to me was Danny Coulombe having his $4 million option declined for 2025. We've tried to reason this out, to rationalize it. To me, it's still a head scratcher because he had a 2.12 ERA in 29 2/3 innings last year. He missed about 3.5 months in the middle of the season with bone chips in his elbow. And people talk about his decreased velocity as that being a potential reason why the Orioles moved on, but he's never been a guy that's relied on his velocity. He's always been a guy whose fastball hovers around 91, 92 miles an hour. And it really dipped less than a mile per hour last season compared to what it had been before. It was probably less when he came back from injury than it was before the injury. But to you, John, what do you think if you had to guess? Because Michael Elias really hasn't given us many answers so far. Maybe at the winter meetings we'll get an idea. But what do you think led the Orioles to decline this $4 million option?
I think there are a couple things. And, there's a lot of like scar tissue and muscle memory here.
Literally or physically?
I don't believe I have no medical history. This is all speaking metaphorically, but like, this is the type of thing that, somebody's making $4 million. Either they're getting traded or they're getting cut.
Jose Iglesias.
Yeah. The list goes on. That was kind of a rebuilding era staple of how this team operated. And I think there's probably a lot more to it than that. We've seen, in some of the other option decisions, Ryan O'Hearn is like the big half of a platoon. Yeah. He's a platoon first baseman DH. And like we saw him play first base for a lot of time last year. And I think it's most appropriate to call him a platoon DH.
Yeah, and he's making twice as much.
$8 million is a lot of money for that, but like the Orioles clearly feel that's worth it and are willing to pay it.
Which is a good sign.
Yes. So I'm not sure it's about the money. $4 million for like a good reliever, if you think he's going to be a good reliever, is not a lot of money.
No.
Jacob Webb, if he's going to make like $2 million, probably the same thing. If you think that that's worth it, you probably do it. So I kind of come back to like whatever they are forecasting and projecting must not have been at that level, must not have been worth it to that extent. I think there's also an aspect of their bullpen management and their bullpen construction. When you have Felix Bautista coming back, I'm going to forget some people, but Sir Anthony Dominguez, Gregory Soto, Zeno Perez, Yennier Cano. That's five right there.
Mm-hmm.
Did I say Keegan Aiken? That's six right there. I believe Keegan Aiken might be out of options as well, but all those previous five guys, Felix Bautista has options, but like, let's not kid ourselves. Yennier Cano, I guess, has options, but like, that's probably not going to happen. You are left with a very inflexible bullpen if you also have Danny Coulomb, if you also have Jacob Webb.
Right.
And while it's good to have all those guys, it's not necessarily prudent roster management to have that be your bullpen going into spring training, because you don't have a lot of flexibility. It impacts you down the line. You might have to lose some of the flexibility you want in the offseason.
Dylan Tate also, who has one option left according to Fangraphs.
Yes. He was claimed, I think, by the Blue Jays.
Right.
I think it was Toronto. I'm not really sure. Missed that guy.
That's right. Yeah.
And think about where these guys who we're talking about who are no longer here came from. Danny Coulomb was not going to make the Twins. He was bought for, for scraps, off the scrap heap by the Twins out of spring training, and he became a really good piece of this bullpen. Jacob Webb, for whatever reason, was DFA'd by the Angels. They have the reasons to do things that I will never begin to understand. But he was DFA'd by the Angels. Everyone was like, what are you doing? The Orioles said, sure, we'll take this guy. There is value to having those guys, and there is, I think, value in believing that you can find those guys again, because that's what the Orioles did and have done and probably will continue to do. So I think overall you're talking about decisions that were certainly not easy. These guys pitched a lot of good innings for this team over the last 2 years, but in the broad scope of where they want to go and how they want to get there, it feels like it was just an issue of like, we need to make some decisions. These are the guys who we deem will not be worth that money.
Right.
And that's kind of where the cutoff was.
And I do wonder what number they would have brought him back at if it was around Perez's $2.2 million, if they would have decided that's good enough, even though he doesn't have any options to bring him back. And I do wonder what the market is going to be for him now that he is a free agent. If he scopes out the market and doesn't find what he's looking for, maybe the Orioles bring him back at slightly less than that $4 million, because he was great for them for 2 years in Baltimore, despite the fact that he missed time with that injury. Good guy to talk to, good guy in the clubhouse. All right. Let's talk about what needs to be done, because we mentioned free agency, and the Orioles, they have a longer list of needs than they have than last year, because this farm system is not the number one farm system in baseball anymore. This pitching staff was hit with a ton of injuries. They will still be reckoning with the rehab of those injuries during this season, and they very clearly need to add another bat to this lineup. When you look at their list of needs, I could say starting pitching, I could say right-handed bat, you could say backup catcher, you could say another reliever now that Coulomb is gone. What to you sticks out as the number one need for the Orioles this winter?
I think the Orioles saw a ton of value in just having Corbin Burns. I mean, this year on the rotation side was kind of a disaster.
Yeah.
I mean, more than kind of a disaster. It probably actually was a disaster. I believe he was the only pitcher that didn't go on the IL.
That's crazy.
Even guys who feels like we're around the whole year. Dean Kramer, he missed some time, and like Dean Kramer's pretty good, even though he's not really appreciated as such. Zach Eflin's pretty good, but he also spent some time on the IL. And, and Grayson Rodriguez, same thing. There was another question about, that shoulder area that's been bugging him, but I think they need to have someone that they just know is going to be in there at the top half of the rotation and give them 170, 180, 190 innings, and you have to pay for it. That's costly, and you have to pay for it. But like, whether that's Corbin Burns or somebody else at the top of the market, a Max Fried, a Sean Manaea, there's going to be a lot more security mentally knowing that that guy exists in this rotation, even if you are constructive on Grayson Rodriguez being healthy and pitching a full season, even if you think that when Tyler Wells and Kyle Bradish come back in the second half, you're going to get the best versions of them, even if you believe the rest of the rotation is going to be its best case scenario. And I think you can feel good about that because usually these injuries come in waves, then they kind of don't come, and then they're back and forth, back and forth. I think you'd feel really good about it if you knew there was that one guy in there.
Yeah.
I think that some of the other needs are going to be a little trickier to fill and might not be like free agency type things. But if you come out of like this free agent period, especially as the market's heating up with a starting pitcher, you're going to feel really good about that.
I mean, it's hard to overstate just how good Corbin Burnes was, as disastrous as that August was. Despite that, just him getting himself out of that, coming back and pitching in that wild card series and absolutely dominating in game one on the season, 2.92 ERA, 194 and a third innings pitched, 15 wins, a whip just over 1. I know his strikeout numbers have been dipping the last couple seasons, but that's by design. He's doing that so that he can pitch deeper into his career, deeper into seasons, and rack up more innings because he's inducing soft contact. So 8.4 Ks per 9 is still nothing to sneeze about. He was awesome for them last year.
Yeah.
That was one of the best seasons by an Orioles starting pitcher in a long, long time.
Yeah, I mean, just looking at the screen you have up here, 1.096 whip was his highest in 5 years.
That's crazy.
Yes, not missing the bats as much, but like you're not hitting him hard, and that's all with a month of a 6-month season where he was getting hit hard. So
his walk rate was 2.2, which was the lowest he's had since his Cy Young season.
Yeah. There's just so much value to that, and it is a dangerous game to pay starting pitchers for what they're going to do in their 30s based on what they did in their 20s. I don't want to be I'm glad I'm not the one who has to make that decision, but whether it's him or any of the other guys who are left at the top of the market, there's just a lot of, there's a lot of value to having that. And I struggle to see a world where the Orioles, having experienced that and having had Corbin Burnes be the rock that he was, I would be very surprised if they go into spring training without that type of presence in their rotation.
Yeah. I mean, those guys just don't come around very often. That's why he's probably the number one guy on the market in terms of starting pitchers. I mean, Max Fried to me is 1A if Corbin Burnes is 1. But if you're going to be shelling out the kind of money that it takes to get somebody who's that good, why not just bring back the guy that you already had in-house in Corbin Burnes that you already know can do that? The only other way to do it is via trade. And we saw what it took to get just 1 year of Corbin Burnes. You give up Joey Ortiz, who's looks like he could be a long-term infielder for Milwaukee. So it would take a lot to go out and get that guy. And it's a question of whether that guy is even available via trade.
Yeah. And I feel like they did a lot of their trading last year. I think it was like, as I was going through it, like a dozen guys who either like were in the top 30 or would have been this year were traded. And that's a lot. And that's all, some of that was adding money, and Corbin Burnes made real money. Zach Eflin's making real money. Sir Anthony Dominguez, obviously somebody who they're paying real money this year. So you're using your financial ability, or I don't know, abilities. That's not the right word. Yeah, you're using the financial clout that you have to get those players, but you're also using players. And like when you have money to spend and you can keep your players, that's probably like the platonic ideal, as long as you can spend it well, because then you have the inexpensive players to kind of balance that out. Yeah.
And they quite frankly, even if they aren't able to get somebody of the caliber of Corbin Burnes, because there's only a handful of those guys, they just need innings. I mean, to go back to Kyle Gibson, the innings eater himself, who was a free agent, by the way, they need somebody to just clog up a ton of innings this season, because you're looking at the rotation for next year and there aren't a whole lot of locks. I mean, it's Zach Eflin, it's Grayson Rodriguez, it's Dean Kramer, and then it's a group of young guys, Cade Povich, maybe Brandon Young, Chase McDermott, Trevor Rogers. That's about it. You're really looking at a hodgepodge of former prospects and some current prospects who are going to have to eat a lot of innings for you. You just don't want that many guys starting that many games, even if you do expect Bradish and Wells to come back right back to their old selves by midseason.
Yeah, and to keep coming back, I feel like I keep saying the same thing, but like they have that kind of like depth, the rotation depth part. Albert Suarez in that mix too. You have him. you have that depth part kind of locked down. If you're going to have the, up down guys, those are all checked off. You have like the fringy, like solid, no, not fringy, but solid big league starters. But like, if you can put somebody above all of them that is going to be there, if you're going to get 360, 370 innings from grown man starter X and Zach Eflin, like you're feeling really good about that.
All right. In terms of offensive firepower, this team definitely needs somebody who can get on base, maybe somebody who can hit some homers. And if they lose Anthony Santander in free agency, that need becomes a whole lot more exacerbated. Austin Hayes, Austin Slater, that combo is not going to do it for you. If you go into next season and that guy is your right-handed hitter, because you have Colton Cowser as a lefty, Cedric Mullins is a lefty, Heston Kjerstad's a lefty, Ryan O'Hearn's a lefty. You need to add a right-handed hitter to this lineup. We saw just how much of an impact Jordan Westburg's injury made last year. Even Ramon Arias going down for an extended amount of time. Ryan Mountcastle, obviously. When those guys go down in the second half of last year, this offense struggled mightily. You just need another guy in there. And if he can preferably play right field, maybe throw him in there and left on occasion. If you're not playing in a gargantuan left field now anymore at Camden Yards, then this lineup just becomes a whole lot deeper.
Yeah, and this is something I've been trying to explore. Time permitted, I will actually write it before they do this, which means this afternoon maybe.
Yeah, they're going to ruin this podcast by signing somebody in an hour. We just know that.
Yeah, I mean, but that would be good for content.
It would be. Yeah.
I think that they're in a unique position with that right-handed hitting need because, Teoscar Hernandez is the person that everyone talks about.
He's the ideal. You build him in a lab for this Orioles team.
Well, of what's in the free agent market, he's the
perfect.
ideal.
Yeah.
He is a little more consistent offensively than Anthony Santander was. If this, 44 home runs are nice, but like I think it was like the third lowest OPS in the last decade of somebody who hit at least 40 home runs. Like there just wasn't a lot there. He is the ideal. Tyler O'Neill is basically just a right-handed hitting version of that. Look, where just hits a ton of home runs, and you're like, what else are you doing?
Yeah.
But Teoscar Hernandez is also the most attractive candidate to everyone who needs that profile. So I think the Orioles, while exploring all the avenues in free agency that they can, I think they're prepared to be a little more creative and maybe it's a trade, maybe it's some other kind of signing that we can't really envision to fill that right-handed hitting need. I wrote about it in Inside the Dugout, the newsletter, but and Michael Eyes kind of poo-pooed it when he was doing the Wall announcement. And when I asked about the potential for moving someone who is an infielder to the outfield so that they can sign an infielder, I was basically thinking about Alex Bregman and how awesome he would be for what the Orioles need. He's got the background of checking all the Astros draft boxes when these guys are running the Astros draft. He's got the pedigree. He's got the offensive skill set. He walked half as much as he did in the past this year than the rest of his career, which I guess is a little concerning, but that is a right-handed hitter who, if you have to put him at third base and move Jordan Westburg to second base and you give Jackson Holliday and Jorge Mateo outfield gloves and say, all right, you just do that, because if you're trying to add upside to this lineup, there are a handful of ways you can do it. And that's one that would ruffle some feathers maybe, but would also absolutely, it would be awesome. Jackson Holliday could still be your backup shortstop. Who cares? Jorge Mateo has been ticketed for the super utility role that he never actually ends up playing for how long. And if he's going to be around, you might as well see if he can do it. I think Nolan Arenado is a watered down version of that. If they can get the Cardinals to eat some salary in a trade and give a couple of prospects who would be kind of dictated by how much they're actually going to pay Nolan Arenado, it's kind of the same type of thing. You'd maybe feel a little less good about what you're getting offensively, but it's still that same presence and impact. So I'm looking at a lot of different ways for that role to be filled, because there's two things that can happen with Teoscar Hernandez. Either the Orioles are we need this guy and we're going to be the team that says screw it, let's give him an extra year and extra money to get him, or they're not. And all it takes is one team to feel that way for the Orioles to be the team that doesn't get him. And that's still going to be a need if that happens. And I think there's probably going to be something that happens to fill it that we are not sitting here thinking about right now.
Yeah. I mean, who's to say the Dodgers aren't that team that just outspends anybody
Yeah.
to bring him back? We've seen what they've done this offseason.
Yeah. And somebody's not going to get Juan Soto. Like somebody
Right.
who wants to spend any,
Exactly.
and like it seems like every team except the Orioles and the Raisins division are trying to get Juan Soto. Like
Yeah.
if they're all ready to spend that kind of money, like they're probably all ready to pivot too.
Yeah.
And you are going to end up with a situation where I think that that's going to shake down a lot of pieces in the market, and you're going to have an answer pretty quickly as to who is there for the Orioles. And then same with the pitchers, they're going to have to make a decision. Like once those pieces start falling and they have to make a call, like are they going to do something that they feel uncomfortable with?
Yeah. I mean, let's be honest, 90% of free agents, that's probably high, 75% of free agents end up getting overpaid, because I think it was the Andrew Friedman quote, who was with the Dodgers, that if you are realistic with every free agent, you will finish third for every free agent. And so to get Teoscar Hernandez, you can come up with a realistic option and a realistic offer to make him. That doesn't mean you're going to get him, because there's going to be somebody, like you said, a team that misses out on Juan Soto that says, Teoscar, we'll give you 6 years.
Yeah.
Heck, we'll give Anthony Santander, another guy who could benefit from these teams missing out on Juan Soto. Tyler O'Neill could be the same. So they might have to get creative. I do like the idea. I kind of thought about it in my head and thrown it around with people, the idea of Jackson Holliday moving to the outfield. We've seen it with outfielders or with infielders like Trey Turner start out in the outfield. I think he has the speed. I think he could do it. It's just, do you want to throw all that on a kid who's 19, 20 and, potentially screw up his development? The other question for me is Kobe Mayo. What is his role going to be with this team when he's going to be 23 years old next year and was projected to be this great power bat, has done nothing but rake in the minor leagues, but just has not shown it in the big leagues yet? Can he play? He's played some first base. He's played some, a lot of third base to iffy, degrees. And, if this team has to move Ryan Mountcastle in a trade this offseason, maybe to get a starting pitcher, then that opens up another hole for Kobe Mayo, and that probably increases your need to get a right-handed bat.
Yeah, and the Kobe Mayo situation is interesting. I think that, I think there's been some interest in, within the organization of seeing what other positions he can play, whether it is spending more time at first base than he has, whether it is, trying him in a corner outfield spot. But where they're at right now with him is that, like, if he's going to focus primarily on first base going forward, maybe play third a game or two a week. That would be the thing they're doing now. And that removes the possibility, unless you want to have him have a primary position that's always been a secondary position, and then a secondary position that's not even been in his repertoire before. That would just be like a lot for a player to do. That would also realistically happen in Norfolk and like over a probably extended period of time, which is not, that's not good for Kobe Mayo. It might be good for his development, but like that's not good if you are him.
Yeah.
And it's not good if you if you have any kind of mental fatigue over like the discourse of like the Orioles keeping people in the minors too long. Like that's just not good for business.
Yep.
And I have very little doubt that he's going to end up being close to the hitter that he was, has projected to be and has shown he has the capability to be. But it will be fascinating to see, because I don't think there's been an example to this extent in this kind of competitive era, like how they fit somebody whose bat is that good into the lineup when they don't know where to play him. I guess Heston Kjerstad is like a similar example, but like that's not an example that I don't think anybody's signing up for that, because that wasn't super fun for a lot of people for a long time, Heston Kjerstad included.
Yeah. I mean, you just kind of wish that, what we saw from Jordan Westburg in the second half of the 2023 season that made you so confident about him going into 24. We just haven't had that with either. We've seen a little bit of Kjerstad, but you just didn't get that with Kobe Mayo, where you felt like, all right, this guy's definitely going to be in the big league roster to start next year. And we got to, even if we can't find an everyday spot for him, we'll fit him into the lineup.
Yeah. And to be fair to Heston Kjerstad, he was playing pretty regularly from his last call up. I think it was like mid-June to when he got plunked in the head. I think his OPS started with a 1 in that stretch. It was like 1,000 something. We're talking about him being that kind of guy over that small sample size. You know, if he doesn't get the concussion, he was already playing a decent amount over Austin Hayes as kind of that fourth outfielder. If he's healthy and hitting like that in August and September, there's probably, again, a different conversation happening about both the offseason and like what happened to this Orioles season.
If only there was somebody on this Orioles team who could play second base and outfield, who hit from the right side, and maybe his last name rhymed with Corby, that they hadn't just traded.
They did trade
for
him.
Trevor Rogers.
They did trade Connor Norby.
Connor Norby would have been, he would have fit a lot of roles. All right. One final thing, and this is not obviously at the top of Mike Elias's priority list, but it sure is on there, and that's a backup catcher. Samuel Basallo did finish the season with AAA, but he's probably not quite ready to be a backup catcher at the big league level. He's still very young, and his defense is the one thing that needs to come along. And James McCann is a free agent, and he is getting up there. So bringing him back would be banking on him staying healthy, staying productive as he ages. We saw a couple bad at-bats from him in the playoffs. What do you think the Orioles are going to do for backup catcher?
It's a really challenging job to back up Adley Rutschman. I think it's probably a really challenging pitch in the free agent market to tell people, like, yeah, come here and like Adley's going to play every day.
Yeah.
James McCann was a good fit in that he allowed, there's not a lot of right-handed hitters in this lineup, so it allowed the Orioles to have Adley Rutschman's bat in the lineup against lefties and give him a break. I kind of envision, I don't know who would fit this bill or would be worth it or would want to sign here if they fit this kind of criteria, but like if you have like another switch hitting catcher, even if they literally can't hit at all, I don't care.
Yasmani Grandal. Can I interest you in 34-year-old Yasmani Grandal?
Sure. Because I am interested in, in Adley Rutschman's schedule not being dictated by who the other team is starting.
Right.
I think that there would be a real benefit to Adley Rutschman and to the Orioles, and not necessarily whoever is his backup, but like to Adley Rutschman and the Orioles for his physical needs to dictate when he gets a day off from catching or when he's out of the lineup entirely, for it not to influence the rest of the lineup by needing to have Adley in there on certain days. If he got a day off, like a real day off a week, not just a day not catching, but like a real day off a week, and it didn't matter if they were facing a run of lefties or a run of righties and day game, night game, if they can kind of just make that decision based on what the data and like the health sciences say about Adley Rutschman, not to say they don't now, but like they could more clearly.
Definitely.
That would be my ideal. Does
that guy exist?
Does that guy exist? Does that guy want to be Adley Rutschman's backup? Does that guy want to come when, there's a not a huge chance, but a slight chance that like there could be another catcher coming up from the minors who's really good to take his job. Like all those things are challenging, but that would be where I was looking in that spot.
And to me, I know fans probably wouldn't want the Orioles to sign somebody to a multi-year deal because they say that's blocking Samuel Basallo, but you could sign somebody to a multi-year deal and potentially, if he works out, trade him.
Yeah.
If Basallo is ready to go.
Yeah. I mean, $2 million catchers get traded all the time.
Yeah.
There's a lot of them out there.
They're traded last deadline.
They're good for a reason. They're good to have around for a reason. Everybody needs one at some point. Like
right.
You can make those moves. James McCann was making a lot more than $2 million, but like he was available.
Yeah.
Like these guys come available, and like you could also probably look at the trade market for that, like they did with McCann.
And I was a long-term defender of James McCann because I saw a lot of people that were online angry about his offensive production, his lack of production. Obviously, he didn't look great in those two postseason at-bats, but you're talking about a backup catcher. Catchers in general don't hit well. Backup catchers hit even worse. You're talking about a guy that willingly was traded to Baltimore, didn't sign with Baltimore signing up for what he was signing up for, but accepted his role immediately to being backup to Adley Rutschman, was a leader in the clubhouse, stood in there when he broke his bleeping nose and caught the rest of that game. Like that kind of guy. And in theory, ideally, he shouldn't have to start those playoff games because Adley Rutschman should be starting behind the plate. And that's a whole other conversation. But to me, James McCann fit that role to a T. If you can get now, there's no saying that James McCann in 2025 is going to be as good as he was and give you exactly what he did in 2024 because he's a year older. But to me, that's what you look for in a backup catcher is what James McCann was.
Yeah. Yeah. And, I'm saying this without knowing the answer to it, but like how many games did the Orioles lose because James McCann was in there rather than someone else?
Right.
Like, probably not a lot.
Yeah. He still produced a positive WAR according to Baseball Reference. Like he was still an above average backup catcher.
Yeah, I mean, there was a time when there was a backup catcher here who didn't drive in a run all year. So like,
That's true.
yeah, James McCann did drive in some runs.
Yeah. Is that guy going to be a broadcaster in Baltimore before we know it?
He could be. I mean, he's qualified.
He certainly
probably shouldn't make jokes about him, although he probably makes jokes about that season as well.
Nobody can take a joke about himself better than Caleb Joseph.
Yeah,
he's a funny guy.
Yeah, he's a funny guy. Well, yeah.
All right. Well, we got plenty to talk about over the coming months. It is crazy that we're really only 2 months and like 10 days away from the start of spring training, and the Orioles really haven't done anything this offseason, but it's a slow-moving offseason already. We will have complete coverage on the BaltimoreBanner.com. Subscribe $1 for 6 months. At Jon Meoli is his Twitter handle. We got the winter meetings next week in Dallas, and I'll be on with Danielle Allentuck to discuss the moves the Orioles are or aren't making and the moves around baseball as well. So we'll be live there. Stay tuned for that. Got the Rule 5 draft coming up, John, our favorite time, even though the Orioles broke the streak last year by not drafting anybody.
Yeah.
In the Rule 5 draft. What a bummer.
It's
my favorite event of the year.
These things happen. You'll just be able to get to the airport a little bit sooner.
Exactly.
Have one of those good airport beers.
Yeah, I can't wait. All right. Thanks so much for tuning in. For Jon Meoli, I'm Paul Mancano. Like, rate, review, subscribe, all that good stuff. We are back on the Banner Baseball Show, and it feels great